Hello, my name is Robert Houlihan, conductor, and I'm looking forward to working for the Irish Association of Youth Orchestras' next conducting course, which will take place this summer. What I'd like to look at today is how to approach learning a score. I've taken one particular one, which is rather a large score, large orchestration, and that's the Brahms Academic Festival Overture. Now, my approach, I think everybody's approach it can be different, but my approach would be like learning a new piece of music for your own instrument. So for example, it could be piano or flute or violin, which only has one line, so it doesn't have a full orchestral score. What's the first thing you do? My approach would be to start from the beginning without playing it, but just going from the beginning to the end and just turning the pages and see what pops out to you. It could be a melody or it could be just dynamics. I have a similar approach into learning an orchestral score. And the main thing now is to take an overview of the whole score by going from beginning to end, turning the pages, and we call this a macro approach. Then I'll follow that with a micro approach, which is examining the details of the different sections. And once again, once I have that done, I go back to the overview again, the macro approach. Okay? So here we go. First thing is orchestration. If we look at the very first page of this Academic Festival Overture and look from the top line right down to the bottom, we see that the orchestration that Brahms gives is, in German it's called Kleine Flöte, which is the piccolo, which sounds an octave higher than written. Then there are two flutes, two oboes, two clarinets in B flat, sounding one tone than written, lower than written. Two bassoons and one contrabassoon, the contrabassoon sounding one octave lower, like the double bass, lower. Two horns in C, although they're written at that octave, they actually sound an octave lower. Two horns in E, which transpose a sixth down. Then we have trumpets in C, three trumpets in C, three trombones, one tuba, timpani, and then rather unusually, Brahms begins already with bass drum and cymbal. He later on adds the triangle, so that's our percussion section. And then into the string section, we have first violins, second violins, violas, cellos, and double basses. That's our orchestration. Now it's really important just to know that from the very beginning. Okay, now slowly let's turn the pages and see what comes out for you. For me, it's rather obvious that there's a rhythmic theme from the very beginning. Not very melodic, but rhythmic. So I'll just turn my pages and I'll see what's happening, and it's a similar thing that's happening for a few pages. Already, if you look at your letter B in the score, we'll see there's a melodic section in the strings. The main theme being in the violas. The trumpet has added in here, just doubling the pizzicato in the first violins. Turning the pages again, what sticks out for me is again this rhythmic theme that we saw already in the very first few bars. It builds up to a forte, so already we have an idea dynamic wise that from pianissimo to piano crescendo it's now beginning to a forte. Always look out for what the highest dynamic in the score will be, so that if there's a fortissimo coming, your forte is relative to that fortissimo, and we'll see that later on. It goes on. Very important to note, right up on the top of that page 13, which is 1, 2, 3, 4 bars after letter C, the clarinets are now changing to clarinets in C. It's written in Italian mutano in C. So that means they change to C clarinets. In most cases, they would actually have to transpose there themselves. We don't change instrument. So we go on. Here, on page 14 to 15, we see that the trumpets in 3 are taking over a melody which is based on a university theme. Okay, that follows on. The woodwinds take over. It continues on. There's a crescendo, another crescendo, it's forte, and then we arrive. Your approach is where is it arriving to? At what's called a l'istesso tempo, which means the same tempo, but un poco maestoso. So here Brahms, what he wants is not really to be so fast. So what I would suggest here is you beat it in force, but not so slow. Would keep it within the same tempo. Then we go on, and then we look at page 21, we see a repeat of what we've already seen in the beginning, in the lower string, rhythmic. From letter E on, we have another melodic element in the first violins. This should be sticking out for you as you're turning your pages. Added on to that then are the woodwinds. Then we come to page 24 and 25, the melodic element in the second violins. First violins double for one bar, and the second violins continue on. Brahms is one of those composers who likes to give more to the inner voices, not only the upper and the lower voices. So here you can look at page 25, the second violins and violas have this wonderful melody and harmonies. So that continues on in the same vein. That continues on, and then we come to the end of page 29. Let's just look at the last four bars of that. You see a similar rhythm in the different woodwind instruments. Dee da 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 da, dee da 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 da, dee da 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 da, dee dam bam. What I do here, my suggestion to you here, is because there's a new change of tempo coming up, is at the very bar before the 2-4 that you beat that in 4, and it helps you to negotiate the 2-4. So I'll just show you gesture wise what to do here. 4 bars before the 2-4, dee da 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 da, dee da 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 da, flus da 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 da, 1 2 3 4 pa 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 pa, and then we have this melody, fantastic melody in the bassoons. That continues on with the oboes joining in, and then all the winds take over that, then strings. Just one thing to note here in page 32, count before letter G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 bars before letter G, how Brahms just doubles for 2 bars the melody in the trumpets. That's very common in the classical composers of the day. You'll find that in Beethoven, where you just give a snippet of a theme to the wind instruments to join in. It's also a colour, so it's important to note that, to mark that, and to bring it out. That goes on, it goes on, and then it picks up crescendo. Again, note the crescendo. The entry of the timpani in page 37 is really important to note, because that player has been resting for a while. The woodwinds take that melody again that we heard from the bassoons. Now we come to page 39, and he writes here common time. So this would not be beaten in 4, but actually in 2. It works very well in 2. The tempos are relative. And that goes on. And see what sticks out for you. Now we have a kind of recapitulation on page 44. The form of this is more or less a modified sonata form, not really a sonata form. So we hear it's very obvious that there's a kind of recapitulation on page 44. We've heard that from the beginning. Now in the lower strings. We arrive now at letter K, which is the fortissimo. Just for your visual side of things, look at what the second violins are doing here at the letter K. It's really important that this not be pushed too quickly, otherwise they cannot play this. And that's an extra effect, if you like, that Brahms adds on. So that continues on. Now it's really important to note the next entry, really for the bass drum and the cymbals, which come in on page 48. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th bar of page 48. The timpani, bass drum, and cymbals. They add into the orchestration. They don't dominate. They add into the orchestration. The 2nd bar of page 49 is where the triangle joins in, and it's really important that you get your players to hold the instrument above the orchestra. It's a wonderful addition to it. So that continues on. It's a great excitement. Again, look at page 52 and 53 from letter L onwards. Again, look at what he does with the second violins and violas. Really important to encourage them to play out, and they acknowledge it very much. So that continues on. It's a very nice atmosphere of piano, dolce, espressivo. Once again, I've shown you earlier on what happens at the 2-4 on page 58. The same thing, the same approach technique wise, 4 bars before is da 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 dee da da, oboes da 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 da, flutes da dee da da, 1 2 3 4 da dee da 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 da. So you continue on beating 2. Now we know that something is happening. There's a slightly cut version of what was there before, builds up to a crescendo, the woodwinds and the brass take over, and now we come to the final section of this overture, which is the 3/4 maestoso. And it's one thing that's very important to note, is that Brahms writes 1 quaver equals 1 crotchet in the previous tempo. And what I would suggest here is that the last 2 bars before the maestoso, that you pull it back a bit, so that if you look at the string sections, they have time to play all those notes. So let's just, I'll just sing the last 3 bars before the 3/4, which is ba 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 bum 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 dim ba bum 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 bum. So actually beat that in 6, and note that the main theme is actually in the winds, with the added scales in the lower strings. Okay, now that's just a general overview, what I call the macro view of the whole thing, so you have an idea of the dynamics and the structure as well from what I've just done there. Okay, now we've seen a general overview, which I called a macro vision of it. We've seen the orchestration, we've seen the dynamics, we've seen that it's gone from pianissimo to piano, to crescendo, to forte, and to fortissimo. It's really important that you gauge how these are played, and there's nothing worse than having a forte that's too loud, but by the time you get to fortissimo, what are you going to do? So now let's look at the first section. The first section I would suggest is from the beginning up to the 2/4. Okay, and first section is that we note that the first violins really have the main theme here. As I said, it's unusual that Brahms adds in a bass drum and cymbals, so it's important that they be heard, but also that they don't dominate the whole thing. On this first page, note well that the horns are in C, and although they look like they are at this level, if you go to your piano, but it's not that. They sound 1 octave lower, which is there. Because your horns in C, it's important to note that. Right, on the very first page now, you see where the thread is. The thread is in the first violins from there. All that's important. Very often I find my own experience is that they have to play a little bit more, especially if you're in a large hall. Don't worry so much about the dynamic. So, if we look at page 6, the next page, look at what he writes in the percussion. He writes in German, ohne Becken, which means that it's only the bass drum is playing now. There's no cymbals here, it's only the bass drum. So in the 2 parts, it's the lower part which is the bass drum, the upper part is the cymbals. So the cymbals don't play there, only the bass drum. So the thread continues, as you can see. Violas take over, they continue on with additions from the winds. And again, the last 3 pages of the last 3 bars of page 7, the viola is still continuing on. Okay, so it's important to know where the line is. Follow the line, follow the thread. Now we arrive at letter A, and we have these arpeggio type things happening in the clarinets and the lower strings. Also, make sure you mark in the entry of the tuba, which hasn't played until now. So the tuba is waiting for your entry there. That continues. The same thread going through. Now, one very important thing is here is the trumpet entry at letter B joins the first and second violins and violas on a pizzicato, upbeat letter B. It's very important that you be aware of it, because the strings going from arco to pizzicato takes a little time for the last note. So in the way you beat that, it's important to show the players that you understand it. So you have bum, 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 bum. So you leave a little space. Now we come to letter B, and it's quite obvious that the violas have the line here. So again, listen out that the violas are heard. It might be important to ask them to play just a little bit more, because you might have less violas than other stringed instruments. So that continues on, and then you can just see where the other instruments, the woodwinds, join in. Then we come to page 11, and the third bar of page 11, we see how what we've heard in the beginning, the rhythmic theme, is coming back in the first violins, and this time he writes piano. So you note that as well. He writes piano with crescendo, so it's a little bit more than what it was in the beginning. Another thing to note is the horns. It's important to look also how some instruments double what's happening in the strings, and this is not unusual in Brahms or Beethoven. So if you look on the last two bars of page 11, third and fourth horns are in unison with the violas. Okay, so those horns are in E, but sounding 1/6 lower. So they're at that level there, okay, and doubling the violas, and that continues on. Now, the important thing, because we've gone from pianissimo to piano to crescendo, we arrive now at our first forte, and the first forte is 4 bars before letter C, but it's only forte. It's really important to note that, because we know that later on there'll be higher dynamics as well. So mark that. We go now to page 13. I've mentioned already the clarinet changing from B flat clarinet to C. It's written on the third bar up there, mutano in C. Now look at what's happening below in the woodwinds, above the woodwinds and below in the strings. This time he writes 3 Ps, not 2, not 1, but 3, which means he really wants this very soft. And obviously that would be related to what you've played earlier on. Okay, that continues. Now we come to another section where the trumpets take over a melody. Again, all the themes in this are based on university songs that Brahms would have heard in his time. And the trumpets are in C, so it's really important that they sing out. Your third trumpet coming in there. The line continues, the thread continues, now taken over by woodwinds, oboes and flutes at the top of page 15. That continues on. Follow the line, crescendo, crescendo, and now we're coming to the top of page 17. 4 bars before the common time. Forte, crescendo continues on in the winds. They still have the line, not the strings. The strings is just an effect with the scales. And then really marked in this time the entry of the piccolo, 1 bar before the common time, the last bar of page 17. The effect is very impressive actually when you do it. Now, one important thing here is to remember on page 18 is Brahms writes l'istesso tempo, which means the same tempo. However, it looks like a contradiction, un poco maestoso, which means that he doesn't want it so quick, but that it has time to be felt. So my suggestion here would be, so I'm just going to beat this for you to give you an idea. 4 bars before that maestoso, you have dim tararam, im pararam, im tararam, 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 pa pa pam, taram, pa pa pam, taram, pa 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 pam. Okay, so you get a feeling still of the 2, but beat it in 4, and that the semiquavers can be heard and can be felt as well. Okay, so that continues on. We'll discuss later on in the course where to beat 2 again, but somewhere along page 20, I'll be suggesting that. Page 21, you can see at the bottom of the score, the lower strings are taking the thread again, which we've heard in the beginning from the first violins. So it's a similar thing. Note also how the horns and bassoon add in, and that can be quite difficult to put together, especially with a young orchestra, because they're further away from the strings. So you're getting an idea of the line. It Continues on up to letter E, and now there's a new melody that arrives in the first violins. Continues on. Next page 23, woodwinds taking over. Again, always follow the line. Where is the line? Ask yourself, where is the line? And obviously there's in the woodwinds. 24 has a forte. The forte here is not a rhythmic forte, but a melodic forte. Dee-da-dum, bum, bum, dee-da-dum, bum, bum. It's a different kind of forte, a singing forte, let's call it that, singing forte. Page 25, see again, the second violins and violas take over the line. As I said, Brahms loves to give the inner voices a bit more exposure. Follow the line again, and this time the thread continues on one bar after the letter F, how the woodwinds take over that. So it's important that your balance is right here. We continue on. And now we arrive at page 29. I've mentioned this before. The last 4 bars now leading in to the bassoons taking over the animato. And as I said, you beat the last bar before the 2/4 in 4, and it helps to negotiate the next tempo. So now we're going to continue on to the second section, which is written animato, and the bassoons are taking the theme here. Now it would be important to note what's happening in the lower strings, violas and cellos. It's really important that your beat is not too big. So you have the bassoons playing, okay, underneath you have offbeats. And what I suggest here is that only wrist movement. When you're practicing this or singing it to yourself, you're otherwise it's very difficult for those players to play offbeat. So follow the thread again, follow the theme. You see that the oboe joins in on page 31. At the end of page 31, the woodwind join in, and then there's a fortissimo. Now I mentioned earlier on about how Brahms, and like in Beethoven, even you'll find this in Haydn, likes to add in little snippets for the woodwinds to give them something to play. So let's look at page 32, and here we look at the horns. In the 4th bar of page 32, they have this, alright, they have that which doubles the melody, and then the trumpets said, they're always happy when they get a little snippet of a theme to play, and it's very important to bring those out, that they not be hidden. And it goes on to letter G, again follow the line, G, letter H, 36, and 37. Now we have the beginning of something that's going to happen, which is a crescendo, piano crescendo, and mark in your score what the timpani are doing here. They add into this crescendo. Okay. The eye contact would be very important there. So this is now in the woodwind, so you have your, even though it's fortissimo, your wrist movement is really important here, because in the strings you have on page 38 the offbeats, ba, 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 and not any bigger than that. So we come now to page 39. The 3rd bar of page 39 is written common time, so the crotchet beat in fact is the same. So instead of beating 4, you could beat 2 here. Okay, so you have yap pam 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 ding yam pam pam pam. So right in above crotchet equals crotchet. It doesn't have to be beaten at 4. It works very well. Now let's look at the orchestration here. I think it's important to be able to hear what you're seeing here as well. So the forte here in the trombones, they're the first who come in on that chord. It's important to hear that note. It's A flat. Okay, so they come in there. Beneath that you have the tuba joining in. If you look above, then you have the horns which are in E, they have that. And then doubling in the first horn, second horn, and trumpet is that. So the chord is a diminished chord, basically. So yeah. very dramatic. And so it's no harm actually for yourself if you have some keyboard skills actually to go to the keyboard and play that to get a sense of what the harmony is. And of course the timpani joins in there as well. Okay, and that continues. You have the similar thing in page 40. Rhythmic in the strings. Page 41. Look at how the strings and the wood and the winds, particularly the woodwinds, are playing across each other. Da da dam, ba ba bam, da da dam, ba ba bam, etc. Letter I is fortissimo. And the trumpet's only 40. Important to note that. Now we come to something that you don't come across always, but it's important to note it. Is 1, 2, 3, 4. In the fifth bar of letter I, the horns are written gestopft, which a German means is to use the hands to stop the sound. So you get a kind of nasal sound. It's not using a mute, it's using the hand, stop sound. So it's very often I find you have to ask the players to play even louder there because they're putting the hands in the bell. You can't hear it. He writes poco forte, but I would write forte. The third and fourth horn in page 43 actually join in the same thing. Stop. Now, there's an omission here on page 44. What Brahms should have written, he may have written it, but it's not in this edition anyway. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth bar on page 44, it should be written open. So that means they take the hands out. Otherwise, if it's not contradicted, they'll continue playing. But it doesn't make sense. So what you write in there is open, so that they play open again. We have in page 44 again a reminiscence of what happened in the very first few bars, but a shortened version of it. Okay, so this goes on. We arrive at letter K, which is fortissimo, and I always say have pity for the second violins. They have quite a lot of notes to play, and it's more an effect than anything else. But try not to push. There's very often a tendency to push the tempo here. So that goes on. Fortissimo. As I mentioned before, in page 48, the last bar of page 48, he has the timpani and percussion, this time the cymbal and the bass drum joining in. It's an added colour, which is really important. And your trombones are playing. Okay, they have the melody, and that's very important that they play above the orchestra. And then in the second bar of 49, a wonderful effect of the triangle coming in, and it's important that you get your players to hold the triangle above the stand. If it's on the stand, you don't actually hear it, and that's the effect there. So again, and look at what's happening. The theme continues on in the winds, page 49. So we've heard some of this music before in previous sections, so it should be obvious what it is. So for example, you have at page 51, the second bar, the first violin. Bring out that effect. Again on page 53, look at the second violins and violas. Never ignore them. Brahms gives them a chance to play something, so they should be more exposed. Letter M, the woodwinds take over. Follow the line, always follow the line of the thread. That continues on. Little discussions going on in the woodwinds. And then we come to page 58, and we see what's happened before. The woodwinds have these triplets, da 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 dee da da, oboes da 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 da, flutes da 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 da, and again dim bam bam and pa dee da dee da da. Two small beats, only using the wrist. That builds up. There's a crescendo. Page 60, the winds have it. Trumpets important. And then we come to the last few bars of page 61, and we arrive at holding it back, as I said earlier, holding it back 2 bars before and we see where the line is now. The line is not in the strings. It looks important, but the scales in the strings are just an effect, and the winds are the ones who have the theme there. So you have your percussion, timpani and triangle as well joining in. And that goes straight to the end without holding back. It's a very joyous ending. As I said, he uses that famous university theme, Gaudeamus igitur, which means so let us rejoice. So it's a fantastic finale to that. Okay. Now we saw the macro approach to it, the micro approach, which means you break it down into sections. Once you've gone through with that, bring it back to the macro, the overview again. And what I'd like to emphasize that there's no easy way around learning a score. You have to give it time. Listening to a recording doesn't solve the problem for you. So it really does take time, a few hours or whatever in a week to prepare it. So again, you come back to the macro, you've broken it down into sections, and now you have another general overview. I would say also, in general, in learning the score, that you do not be too shy to actually sing it for yourself. It doesn't matter about the quality of your voice, but it's a very good and useful way of interiorizing a score. It's not just to sit there and be inactive. Be active yourself while you're sitting in front of the score. If you happen to have some keyboard skills, it's very useful, because then you could maybe play harmonies and sing a melody or whatever. But don't be afraid to, even just from the very beginning, I don't have the best voice in the world. You get a sense of what it's about. Okay? And that's my advice to you on how to learn this score, but also how to learn the score in general. And now we're going to come to the other scores that are on the course, and we will use a similar approach. So now that we've explored the Brahms more or less in detail, I'm suggesting now that we look at Egmont. I'm not going to explore it so much in detail, but just use the similar approach. Again, an overview. And the first thing that comes to mind for me in the very first bar is that it's in unison. And when you look at the register of the orchestration, the highest note there is in the flute, and the lowest note is in the double basses. And I think of all the Fs that are played in between there. It's really important to know that, to have that in your ear, and not to have just at there, but at that level there. So that's really important to note that. The very first thing that comes across to me is the forte, diminuendo. Immediately diminuendo. It's not fortissimo, it's often played too loud, but it's forte. Only forte and diminuendo. Then it comes back in bar 9 as fortissimo, and this time he has no diminuendo, so you sustain that fortissimo right through. Okay? So we come to the next section, 3-4. Allegro. In the main, this can work very well in a bar, one beat in the bar. Follow the line, and the line is in the cellos. That goes on. We know already from the beginning there's a forte, there's a fortissimo, there's piano, and then he has a few more forte, fortissimo. One very important point to note is in bar 98 he writes one forte, in bar 99 he writes two fortes. It's very typically Beethoven. You'll find that in the piano sonatas, you'll find it in the violin sonatas and the string quartets, and also a lot of his orchestral music, to be able to show the difference between one forte and two fortes. Alright? And then another section is right at the very end, where it goes into the major, which is the victorious section, the Allegro con brio. My suggestion here, it depends on the quality of your players, is that you start this in 4, dee-da-da-dum, 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 and here in two. Dee-da-da-dum, dee-da-da-dum, da-da-da-dum. It can work in two from the beginning, but my suggestion would be four and then crescendo, fortissimo. And look at your fortissimo in the woodwinds. So that's a general overview. We've gone from a forte unison in the first bar, diminuendo, to fortissimo at the very end. It's really important to note that. What I meant to mention after the Brahms overture is there's a book by Samuel Adler, which can be very useful for you to have while you're studying your scores. It's called The Study of Orchestration by Samuel Adler. It's useful to have it with you beside your scores, rather like a dictionary when you're learning a foreign language, in case you have any doubts about the transpositions and things like that. It's all the information is there for you. Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. I hope this has been very useful for you, and I look forward to seeing you in the summertime. Thank you. Bye-bye.